Hey folks, welcome to part 2 of week 2. We're going to continue talking about creation, and we'll go a little deeper into thinking about individualism and communitarianism, oral and literary cultures, literal and figurative and allegorical, symbolic readings. We'll talk about the Bible and biology, and I also want us to think a little bit about, is this story in Genesis possibly the effort toward communal reconstruction? Because if we think about the world behind the text, this text was actually written down. It was penned in a time when this group of people, who we know as Israel, was experiencing a really traumatic time in their history. Before we do that, though, I would like for you to watch this video. It's actually a TED Talk by Chimamanda Adichie, and she talks about, well, the danger of one story. So take a moment right now and watch the TED Talk. Good, so I want you to think through what she's actually saying, right? If we only get one side or one story and we don't have multiple perspectives, right? We as human beings don't have an opportunity to experience the rich variety and diverse perspectives of this world, and we might think that our way is the best or the only way. I'm going to read you a story, actually, and this was found in Benjamin Franklin's journal. But this story, in fact, supports Adichie's argument. A Swedish Christian minister, having assembled the chiefs of the Susquehanna Indians, made a sermon to them, acquainting them with the principal historical facts on which our religion is founded. So that's Christianity. Such as the fall of our first parents by eating the apple, the coming of Christ to repair the mischief, his miracles and suffering, etc. And when he had finished, an Indian orator stood up to thank this minister. "What you have told us," says the Indian orator, "is all very good. It is indeed bad to eat apples. It is better to make them into cider. We are much obliged by your kindness in coming so far to tell us those things which you have heard from your mothers. In return, I will tell you some of the things that we have heard from ours. In the beginning, our fathers had only the flesh of animals to subsist on, and if their hunting was unsuccessful, they were starving. 2 of our young hunters, having killed a deer, made a fire in the woods to boil some parts of it. When they were about to satisfy their hunger, they beheld a beautiful young woman descended from the clouds and seated herself on that hill which you see yonder among the blue mountains. They said to each other about this woman, 'It is a spirit that perhaps has smelt our broiling venison and wishes to eat of it. Let us offer some to her.' They presented her with the tongue. She was pleased with the taste of it, and she said, 'Your kindness shall be rewarded. Come to this place after 13 moons, and you will find something that will be of great benefit in nourishing you and your children to the latest generations.' They did so, and to their surprise, they found plants they had never seen before, but which from that ancient time have been constantly cultivated among us to our great advantage. Where her right hand had touched the ground, they found maize. Where her left hand touched it, they found kidney beans, and where her backside had sat on it, they found tobacco. The good missionary, disgusted with this idle tale, said, 'What I delivered to you were sacred truths, but what you tell me is mere fable, fiction, and falsehood.' The Indian, offended, replied, 'My brother, it seems your friends have not done you justice in your education. They have not well instructed you in the rules of common civility. You saw that we, who understand and practice those rules, believed all your stories. Why do you refuse to believe ours?' The challenge today, as we look at Wong, Jayakumar, and Williams, is how do we look at other creation stories that are not our own? How do we look at myths, which are across the board what all creation stories are, as we found earlier, right? How do we understand them? Can we respect them and honor them as true? Do we have a knee-jerk reaction to hearing other people's stories and possibly dismissing them because we were not taught that they were truth? What if someone else was? Does it make their story untrue because it's not ours and ours is? things to think about that we'll continue to discuss. Okay, so briefly about the world behind the biblical text, right? I mentioned earlier that some people think that Moses wrote it thousands and thousands of years ago, right? What biblical scholars have come to realize is that the text itself was actually penned after the 6th century BCE. So if you'll notice on this slide here, the world behind and inside, the Enuma Elish in Genesis 1, one of the things that I'm pointing out, which you'll actually probably talk about in your GPS 120 course, so I'm not going to go too in depth with this, is the parallels between the Enuma Elish, which was written in Babylon, and the biblical text in Genesis 1, right? So what's interesting is scholars have noticed these similarities, which are God orders out of chaos and there's darkness. Tiamat and Tehom are the same, right? The waters. Their light exists before their sun and moon. There's a division of the waters, and there's a barrier between. And then the sequence, water, land, luminaries, and then humanity, is exactly the same. So scholars have looked at this and realized that the similarities come because there were actually people, the people of Israel were in fact enslaved in Babylon. And this was in 586 BCE. The temple, the Jewish temple, well, at that point, the temple of the people of Israel, was destroyed by the Babylonian Empire, and the people who worshipped there, and the people that were known as Israel, were enslaved. They were taken captive and enslaved and then taken to Babylon. So while there may have been earlier manuscripts of Genesis recorded and kept in the temple, they would have been destroyed, and they would not have been carried, most likely, with those who were held captive. Therefore, the people of Israel began, after their enslavement, to write these stories again, right? To write the creation story and the stories of their ancestors. And they did so working from the oral traditions that they knew from their ancestors and that had been passed down. So what I want us to think about then is why, after the enslavement, the people of Israel, their captivity and enslavement, the people of Israel would have wanted to write down the creation stories and stories about their ancestors. What do you think? I want you to think about this, right? Possibly because they were going through a traumatizing experience. They were now a diasporic people that had been taken from their homeland, carried to another place where they had other gods, other stories, right? A whole other culture. And they, in this time, most likely wanted to call upon their God, their culture, their stories, their narratives that made them who they were, right? They didn't want to lose their identity in this time. They were then set free by King Cyrus of Persia at the beginning of the 6th century, right? And were given the opportunity to go back to Palestine, Israel, and then they began to form their communities again and to regain their sense of identity and their sense of place. Okay.